Hey guys, it's Nicole. Welcome to part 3 of my huge unhaul. If you have missed part 1 or part 2 of my unhaul, I will leave the playlist linked down below. You can check it out. Otherwise, let's just dive right into what other books I am getting rid of. I'm getting rid of all my George R.R. Martin Song of Ice and Fire series. I think I've read the first 3 books and then I gave up. I loved the TV show and I did like the books, but he's never finished the series, as we all know, and I don't think he will. Yeah, so I just don't think this is a series I'm going to complete. If I ever do, I will probably pick up the audiobooks because I did try one of these on audio and I did like the audiobook. So goodbye to these. This series I read when I was a teenager. I was obsessed with them. It kind of reminds me of Gossip Girl, but set in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And that is the Lux series. I feel like this is such a classic YA. Did anyone else read these? I love them. I don't remember much. I think one of the main characters, who's like the Serena, essentially, in this book, goes missing. And then it's all about the scandal and drama of the socialites of this time. And yeah, it was fun, but I've never reread them and I don't think I ever will. I'm getting rid of this copy of Love, Rosie. I read this and I completed it right before I went to go see the movie. I went to the movie theater like, I don't know, 30-40 minutes before my friends showed up, and I finished like the last 30 pages or so before my friends turned up. I can remember being so angry at this book and going into the movie theater just feeling very negatively about the story, because this entire story is miscommunication. It's basically about these two best friends who have been in love with each other their entire life, but just both keep missing the opportunities to tell one another. This whole book is written in like letters and emails and chats, so it's all like mixed media, but conversation mixed media between these two characters. And oh my god, for a book that was entirely written in conversation, they were missing the point. They were missing the main point, and it was very frustrating. When I finished this, if I was not in a public space, I would have thrown this across the room. I was so frustrated. I've never ever finished a book and been left with so much frustration. Like, this book takes that crown. I have these Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants books. I think I only read book 1 and I always wanted to read more in the series, but I never did. This is such a random book, but it used to be one of my favorites when I was young. It's Chicken Soup for Dog Lovers' Souls, Stories of Canine Companionship, Comedy and Courage. It's basically like these stories about people and their dogs. Yeah. Yeah, I loved this book so much, but I haven't picked it up since I was young. I've just held on to it, which I no longer need to do. I'm getting rid of this copy of Dead Europe, which is a book I had to read for a lit class. This is an Australian fiction book. This young man, his family are Greek immigrants living in Australia. So there's a lot of interesting themes of him not feeling entirely Australian because he has been born and raised in Australia. However, he comes from a Greek household. So then he goes back to Greece. He goes there with the expectation that he thinks he will feel more at home there. However, he goes there and they don't see him as Greek. They see him as Australian. So it's like a very interesting, like, no man's land. I think that's the way they referred to it. However, I will say this is one of the most provocative, like, grotesque stories I've ever read. Like, it made me so uncomfortable. I know I read this multiple times because I wrote an essay on it and I just could never figure out my feelings on it. Like, it was a very interesting read. I have this book Unleashed, which is Wolf Springs Chronicles book 1. I never read this one, but I know it's a werewolf book. I never really got into a werewolf phase. I have to say that's something I missed the boat on. Picked up this book to try to get into a werewolf phase when I was a teenager, but it never really happened. I have this little edition of Never Let Me Go. by Kazuo Ishiguro. Now, this book I did read. I read it about 2 years ago. I know this book is very beloved. However, it was not for me. I get the point, but at the same time I missed the point with this book. It's a literary fiction story that follows like 3 friends from an orphanage, I think, and their lives together. I don't know. Very messy characters and very interesting and like beautiful writing, but really just not for me. I have this book, Carrier of the Mark by Lee Fallon, and I've never read this, but I think it's set in Ireland. Yeah, it's about a girl who moves to Ireland. I always wanted to read it because I haven't read many books set in Ireland, but again, another book I've just missed the time of reading. These books here, this is the first book in this series, Ranger's Apprentice. This was one of my favorite fantasy series when I was a kid. I think I've read like the first 5. There's a lot more. And then I collected these when I got older, these other ones from charity shops, because I've always been intending to go back and reread the entire series. And I did go back and I started rereading it. However, I've never completed it. I'm getting rid of all these Sarah J Maas books. Here I have all the books in A Court of Thorns and Roses. One's up here. And then I have the first 4 books in the Throne of Glass series. They're about to all fall. I read the first 2 books of Throne of Glass when only these 2 were out, and I loved them when I read them. And then when I read these 2, I was very disappointed with the direction the series took. Like, it just really does take a turn. I actually own the entire Throne of Glass series in hardback, which I've decided to keep. I might get rid of down the track. I own 2 copies because someone gave them all the hardbacks to me. So in all honesty, when it comes to Sarah J Maas, I am someone who gets convinced to read their books every time because I feel the FOMO so strongly. Like, honestly, that's it. Like, none of her books I don't think I've rated very highly. FOMO really gets to me with these, so I always end up reading them and buying them, but I'm not going to buy them anymore. Like, I'll just read them. I don't need to buy them, you know, because they're not favorites. I'm getting rid of all these Gail Forman books. So I've got the If I Stay duology, and then I also have the Just One Day duology. I've read both of these, or all of these. Gail Forman is a reporter, and her writing wasn't my favorite. Like, you could tell she's a reporter because her writing is very much matter of fact, straight to the point. I think this is one of those situations that the popularity just like convinced me that I needed to read it, and I did. I'm getting rid of all my books in the selection series. I have all of them except one. I loved this series. I'm not gonna lie, like, these were favorites when I was a teenager. They were so good. America was a very annoying character. Like, I can see why people dislike the series because of her. Totally valid. But you know what? A bachelorette sort of book in this fantasy dystopian setting, or just dystopian, it's not fantasy. It was so fun. It was so dramatic. I never completed the sequel series though. I only read the first book in the sequel series where we follow the daughter. You know what? I would recommend these books still if you want the easiest read when you're sick. Like, if you just want to be entertained and you're really, really sick, I would read these. Like, I just had COVID and I was thinking, like, you know, when you're sick, you don't want to use a lot of brain power. These are the books. There you go. I'm also getting rid of all my Jenny Han books. So there we go. So I have To All the Boys I Loved Before. I've read both of these. I never read or purchased the 3rd book in the series because I was annoyed. I was annoyed that this was originally a duology. It felt like it was completed, and then she added a 3rd book, and I got really annoyed when the author did that. There was a period where like so many YA authors where I had completed their series kept adding books in the series, and I was like, excuse me, like, this is so rude. Like, now I can't say I completed the series. I'm very dramatic sometimes. And then I also have The Summer I Turned Pretty, which I think were the first books by her that I read. I read the whole trilogy. I didn't like them. I have a thing where I cannot read books where there's a love triangle and two of the people in the love triangle are brothers. Like, you know, one girl between two brothers and she's got to choose between two brothers. It just puts off the whole story for me. I will say that I watched the TV show adaptation of these books, or of the first book, earlier this year when it came out, and I loved the TV show. I highly recommend. I think it's fantastic. I'm glad they made the changes in the TV show that they did, because definitely made the story better. Okay, these next 4 books, I have no excuse, no reason. They're all the same book. Tales of the Earthsea. I've read them. I've read these. Well, I've read one book, technically. I didn't read the book 4 times for 4 different copies. I've read it once. This is what happened. I brought this edition first. I used to really like these editions and I wanted to collect them in hardback because I definitely went through a phase where I was obsessed with hardbacks. So I brought this first. However, this is only book 1 in the series. So then I was like, oh, okay, well, I should buy the rest of the books and you can buy them in these bind-ups. So then I bought this bind-up. Now, a little bit of a confession. I never knew what to do about this. Basically, I brought this from Book Depository and it got delivered to my place. Like, it said it got delivered and I could never find it. And I was like, it didn't get delivered, it got lost. So I emailed Book Depository and they were amazing and sent me a copy that I received in the mail. And then a long time later, like months later, like 6 months down the track, I think it was when we were moving and we were unpacking, I found in a cupboard my package. And my dad had just like put it in there and forgotten to tell me. Like, I don't know what possessed him to do that. But yeah, basically it's his fault. I have 2 copies of the same book and I didn't know what to do, and maybe I should have contacted Book Depository, but I did at one stage have books lost in the mail by them that they didn't replace, so I think it equals out. Like, I hope so. I've always felt really bad about this, but you know, it wasn't my fault. So that's how I have those 2. And then this one I found in a charity shop and I just fell in love with this retro fantasy cover. I have these 2 books in the Wings series. I grabbed both of these secondhand because I used to always want to read these, but I've never picked them up. All I know is they're fairy books. And I think I had given up on fairy books by the time I grabbed these, so I never read them. I'm getting rid of Timekeeper by Tara Sim, which is a book I've read and I really enjoyed. It's set in this alternate London and there are all these different clock towers, and basically there's different clock towers for different like sections or districts of London, and they have to be very carefully managed because if a clock tower like breaks down, then it can impact time and how time moves, and if it completely like breaks the clock tower, then time stops altogether. So the main character we follow here, he is a like mechanic who works on the clock towers. I don't actually really remember the story though, I just really remember the setting. I think the clock towers become in danger and then it's like him trying to save them, and there's a romance with him and a ghost. You know what? I should keep this. I want to reread it. I never continued the series. I think I want to keep this. Oh my god, I think I just convinced myself to keep this book, reread it, and then continue with the series because I did really like it. It's a steampunk setting as well, and yeah, okay, I'm keeping it. Oh my god, whoops. I'm getting rid of all these books by Dan Brown. I have actually never read a single book by him, but I was always grabbing his books in charity shops because I did love the movies. Like, I loved the Da Vinci Code. If you've read them and you love them, like, feel free to convince me because I still could possibly read them down the track. I just don't need to physically own them. This is Stolen by Lucy Christopher. This was so popular when I was in year 10. Like, everyone was reading it, and I used to love this book, which is kind of questionable when you think about the content of this book. This book follows a girl who gets kidnapped. This whole story is a letter that she's writing to her captor that details her kidnapping and how she felt about him and the whole situation, and also what it's like to now be free and to realize the situation that she was actually in. She does get Stockholm syndrome, so she does kind of fall in love with him. I loved this. I loved this so much, but it was the first book I ever read told in second person, and I thought that was so captivating. Like, it starts off in the airport and she describes, like, I think him following her and her meeting him for the first time and what it was like to actually be taken, and I thought, like, the beginning, like, particularly was so gripping. Like, this is a book that I know is probably problematic. Like, I don't know if it is or if it's like problematic unintentionally, or if it's trying to just show problematic content, because I do think it was saying something very interesting. But I think because I read this with a teenage mind, I was immature in my thinking towards this. I don't want to reread it though and tarnish my memory of it. I don't want to do that. But I'm just going to acknowledge that I probably missed the point. I'm getting rid of all these skullduggery Pleasant series I own. I only read the first two. This was a really fun middle grade series though. I did enjoy it. We follow this girl who I think somehow starts working for this guy called Skullduggery Pleasant, who's like this dead skeleton magician, detective, warrior, person, guy, dead dude. Yeah, it was very well written. I can remember really enjoying the writing, but I never continued, and I just don't think I am at this point. Also, I know I started reading this because it was like my boyfriend's favorite series, and then I stopped reading it when we broke up, so there's also like that backstory behind it. I'm getting rid of my copy of Timeline by Michael Crichton. Oh, actually, I know I have one other book by him. It's here. I'm also getting rid of Next by him. Both of these I've read. I really enjoyed these. Michael Crichton, he also wrote Jurassic Park, which I haven't read. I've been meaning to read for a long time. Will happen one day. But I feel like his books are kind of a one and done kind of deal. Like, you read them, but you don't return to them. Really fun, really interesting sci-fi concepts, and very action-packed. Like, I can see why a lot of his books have been turned into movies, because they're very cinematic. I'm getting rid of this random book by Oprah Winfrey, which I think I did read. It's called What I Know for Sure. It's a non-fiction book. I don't remember a single thing. These covers, I have to say, like, they're not the nicest looking thing, but they glow in the dark, and I didn't realize that until they were in this pile. And now every night I come out and I see them like just glowing. These covers and the spines in particular just glow. But this is, I think it's the Wake trilogy. I know I read book 1 and I brought this series in a binder, and I never continued with book 2 or book 3. Oh yeah, I think I was really intrigued about this because it is about like dream magic. Like, the main girl gets pulled into other people's dreams when she's asleep, but I think I found it really boring. Sounded cool, just wasn't actually that cool. I'm also getting rid of these books that I never read. I think it's a dystopian series where vampires are evil. Let me cross-check that. Yeah, I was right. Yeah, so like the setting of this series always really intrigued me, but I don't know, I just never ended up gravitating towards it and picking up. Another dystopian series, I really did collect the dystopian books, but I have this, Under the Never Sky. Only read book 1, never read book 2 or book 3. I will say, this is a series I bought because of BookTube, because when I discovered BookTube, this series was super popular. I'm also getting rid of my copy of The Strange and Beautiful Sorrows of Ava Lavender, which I have read. I read this a long time ago. I don't remember much. It's a very beautifully written story. There was a lot of metaphors, like this girl has wings, I think. There was a lot of metaphors to do with her wings, I believe. What a random detail to remember. but I think I did really quite like this. I remember reading it in one sitting. I think that speaks quite positively about this book, but again, it's been a very long time. I'm getting rid of this book, Between Shades of Grey by Ruta Sepetys. I've only read one Ruta Sepetys, and I read it after I brought this book. I read Salt to the Sea. I think because I listened to the audiobook of that. I hated Salt to the Sea. I've never been able to bring myself to pick this book up because of how much I disliked Salt to the Sea. I'm really sad about it though, because I remember what intrigued me and what made me want to pick up a Ruta Sepetys book was because she does write about history and like events in history that aren't often discussed about. This is about Lithuania in 1941, so I think it must be to do with the war as well, I'm guessing. I'm also getting rid of my copy of the book by Marcus Zuzak. I actually didn't really like this. Not that I didn't like this, I think I was just very disappointed. Like, this book had been hyped for so long before I read it, and I knew going into it that the narrator of the story was deaf, and I was so excited about that. I thought that was such an interesting and different concept, and I just wasn't that impressed in the end, which is really sad. Like, maybe one day down the track I'll give it another go and I'll like it, but I'm also not the biggest fan of this edition, so I'm just gonna pass it along. I feel like someone else will get a lot of joy out of finding this book in a charity shop. I'm also getting rid of this copy of Ready Player One, which I read and I really enjoyed this. Video game concepts, particularly ones like this, I think is a lot of fun. But again, not going to reread this, and I've never even read the sequel. I don't think I will. I have this random book by Edgar Snow. This is China's Long Revolution. Basically, I did a unit in high school on revolutions, and we studied the Chinese Revolution, and I wrote an essay on the Long Walk or the Long March, and I got this book in order to research and help me write my essay. Don't need to hang on to it anymore. Served its purpose a long time ago. This is Nikolai of the North. It's basically about a young boy who grows up to become Santa Claus. I know I read this as a kid, but I don't remember anything. I'm getting rid of these two books by Gabrielle Zevin that I've read. This is a really interesting concept. Basically, it's about the afterlife, and we follow these characters who are now dead. I remember being very touched and moved by the story, and I liked the way it was explored. And I've also read this one, Memories of a Teenage Amnesiac, which is not a very nice word to pronounce, to be honest. This is basically a girl who, yeah, loses her memory. I do not remember much about this, but there's a Japanese movie adaptation of the story that I also watched, and I remember enjoying that as well, which I think is what originally put me on to this book and made me read it, because I liked that movie. I'm getting rid of all these Kelly Armstrong books that I own. I own this trilogy of hers. The first book is this one, The Summoning. This was one of my favorite trilogies as a teenager. I'm going to describe the plot, and I've realized in recent years that it's kind of questionable, this setup. We follow this girl whose name is Chloe, and basically she starts seeing dead people. She's a necromancer, spoiler alert. It's this whole thing at the beginning is she actually someone with powers, or is she someone with a mental illness? And so she's sent to this home where all these other teenagers with mental illnesses also live. See what I mean by this? Probably a little questionable, because it's like, does she have magic or is she crazy? Like, that's kind of the vibe. But anyway, moving past that, I loved this. I really loved this. I think why I loved this so much was I love necromancy. Like, I haven't actually read a lot of books where there are characters with necromancy magic, but it's something that fascinates me. Like, I love books with necromancy, with ghosts, the whole shebang. and I think that's why I really love this. I have this random book, Sorcerer's Moon by Julian May. I've never read it. I think it's book 3. I got it in a charity shop because I guess I thought I was gonna find book 1 and book 2 and read the whole series someday. This book, I have Dash and Lily's Book of Dares. I loved this so much. I read this in one sitting. I thought it was so much fun. I will say, I do think this is a bit of like a John Green teen book, and I was such a John Green girly. Yeah, I confess that with my head held high. I'm getting rid of this book, which is We Need to Talk About Kevin. This is one of my most hated books that I've ever read. It is a story that follows the mother of a school shooter, and the shooting happened I think like a couple of years ago, and she's writing letters and sort of documenting her life now. The thing is, this character is awful. Honestly, I really struggled to read this because I struggled to be in her head. I do think this book had some very interesting commentary on societal pressure on women to become mothers. However, I didn't like how she sort of talked about her kid. She basically describes her son Kevin as being evil from birth. She also has a daughter after she has Kevin, and she describes her as being an angel. And I don't know, like maybe I missed the commentary, but I just did not like this. I'm getting rid of all these like pony books that I had as a kid. Let me know, did you guys ever watch The Saddle Club? Like, was this just an Aussie thing? The Saddle Club was like my favorite show as a kid. It had the best soundtrack ever. Like, it was so good. And I have all these pony power books. Loved them growing up so much. Okay, I'm also getting rid of all my Jodi Picoult books. I was going to try and pull them out to show you, but there's so many, so I'm just going to show you with the camera and talk you through them. As you can see, I have, a lot of her books. She was one of the first adult, like, contemporary authors I ever read, and I was very obsessed with her when I was like, I want to say when I was like 15. I think House Rules was always my favorite. It's gotten to that point where there are too many books on the floor. I've been filming for too long, and it's the end of the video. So I guess there's going to be a part 4. Stay tuned. If you've made it this far, leave this emoji in the comment section to let me know. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate your support. I hope you're still enjoying these and you're not bored yet, but I'm enjoying being detailed with the books and telling you a little bit about them and my thoughts and experience of them, because I also kind of want to do this as a way to keep memories of them. A lot of these books I had very positive reading experiences with, so I want to hold on to it a little bit in a form of this video. So hopefully you're not bored yet, but either way, I'm still going. Thank you again for watching. I hope you're enjoying whatever you're currently reading, and hopefully I'll see you next time. Bye!